Hey folks, I'm going to show you my complete Git workflow with some of my favorite tricks that help me stay productive at my day job, where I work on a huge open source project with something like 3 million lines of code. And by the way, I'm Mikola, and on this channel I talk about developer productivity and also share my journey in building a small iOS indie app. So I mentioned in the intro the project I'm working on, and I'll show it to you in a bit, but I also want to mention that at any given moment I have one or a few smaller pet projects, and there my Git workflow is very simple. Basically, it boils down to committing whenever I feel like and pushing straight to main, which I think is totally fine when you know what you're doing. But going back to my work project. It's a public repo on GitHub, feel free to have a look. You can see that hundreds of people are actively working on it, and there are multiple commits merged to main every single hour. So I want to walk you through the process of building a feature in such a code base, but specifically focusing on managing your code using Git. In a large project like this, work is usually split into isolated chunks with the corresponding tickets in some project management system. In our case, we track everything directly on GitHub. So I pick up one of the tickets, which might be some new feature, a bug, or just a technical improvement. And usually I want to start my implementation based on the most recent version of the repo. So I switch to my local main, then fetch all the latest upstream changes and reset to the latest commit on the remote main. And at this point I can create a new branch for my changes. And because most of the code I write is directly attached to some ticket, as I mentioned, I always include the ticket number into the branch name next to the human readable part, of course. Imagine I'm going to start working on this issue. I could first copy the ID, then read the title and come up with a relevant branch name. Then I'd go to my terminal and do something like git switch -c and assemble the branch name. Not the end of the world, but also not the most optimal process for sure. And luckily there is a way to do all of this automatically with a single command. GitHub's official CLI has a ton of useful shortcuts for common actions around issues, pull requests and whatnot. You should always check it out if you haven't already. And creating a new branch for an issue boils down to gh issue develop, then issue number and -c to switch to the new branch right away. It went to GitHub, grabbed the issue ID and the title, generated a branch name and finally switched me to the new branch. And of course you can make it even shorter with a shell alias. Usually when I'm in the middle of my work, something comes up and I have to switch to another branch or create a new one for bug fix or whatever. And here I have a few tips. First, I often need to switch back and forth between just two branches, and Git has a nice default shortcut for this. Git switch -, this will switch me to the previous branch, then git switch - again, and I'm back where I was before. Second, to navigate between branches faster, I use a tool called git jump. I wrote it for myself quite some time ago and still use it pretty much daily. What it does, first of all, it shows me the list of branches in chronological order with the most recently used branches at the top. I can then select the branch I'm looking for using arrow keys, or I can also start typing to use fuzzy search and find the branch this way. This is awesome when I only vaguely remember the name of the branch or I want to quickly find it by the corresponding ticket ID. And by the way, because the ticket number is unique, I could just do git jump with the ticket ID and it would find the best matching branch and switch me there right away. It's open source on GitHub, so feel free to check it out if this looks interesting to you. I often need to reference some code in another branch while staying in mine, and I could just open GitHub, find the branch, and then find the file I'm looking for, but there is yet again another command that does all of this automatically. Git actually has a built-in way to kind of do what I need here, but not exactly. git show with the name of the branch and path to the file will show me the file content, but first it just dumps it to the terminal, which is not very convenient, and second, it will get the file from the local repository, and it might have been changed already on the remote, so I'd need to do git fetch first every time. So instead, I use another command from GitHub CLI. Usually, I first copy a relative path to the file in VS Code using the built-in command, and then in the terminal, I do gh browse, paste the file path, and then -b with the name of the branch. And it will just open the file on GitHub. And in the same way, you can also look up specific commits, issues, or pull requests. This one is very simple. If I need to reset a single file to a version from some other branch or from a specific commit, Git has a built-in way to do that. Git restore, then source with the name of the branch or commit, and then path to the file. I use it quite a lot in my day-to-day. This one is a bit advanced, but it saved me so much time over the years. So if I start working on my changes not from the latest main, but rather from some other branch that has not been merged yet, there is a good chance I'll get merge conflicts when I try to rebase or merge my branch into main. And in those situations, I know that those commits have nothing to do with my changes, it's those previous commits causing the headache. So instead of trying to resolve them, I open git log and copy the hashes of only my good commits. Then I just throw away all the changes in my branch completely and reset it to the latest main. And from here, I then cherry pick the good commits that I saved before. And of course, this works in a very limited set of cases, but with the number of conflicts you get in a big project, anything that can save you from resolving them worth learning and trying out. In case I eventually couldn't dodge the commit and I have to resolve it, my most important tip here is to use your IDE as a conflict resolution tool, the same one that you used to write the code in the first place. There is for sure no shortage of standalone merge tools or Git UIs with some kind of built-in merge interfaces, but where they all fall short is the code analysis. They basically treat the code as any other text and just add a syntax highlighting on top, while your IDE has linters and language servers to help you make decision on how the final code should look like after the conflict is resolved. They will highlight any used variable or redundant import, for example, and even in the state of conflict, you can still jump around the code base and look up stuff for reference. Not to mention that resolving a conflict often doesn't just mean to select one version or another. In the complex cases, you need to adapt the code in the process, and I would much prefer to do this in my IDE. Now, when I'm done with my changes and all the conflicts are resolved, it's time to commit and create a pull request. I prefer to have a single commit with all of my changes at first, and then additional smaller ones if I need to adjust something during the code review. And that first commit is kind of straightforward. It should be a nice one with a descriptive message. But all the followings are usually looks something like fix, address comments, fix tests, whatever. Obviously, no one cares about those messages, and thinking about what to write and actually typing them is just a waste of your time. So I just use git commit fixup. And if you're not familiar, fixup just takes the message from one of the previous commits and adds a specific fixup prefix. That by itself is not terribly useful, but when I rebase, I can use the auto squash flag and Git will automatically squash commits that have the fixup prefix. So you end up with a single nice commit. The next step would be to enable auto squash by default in the global Git config. The last step in the whole workflow is to finally push my branch. And the default way is of course to explicitly specify the remote and the branch where you want to push changes. But that again is a bit too verbose. To make it shorter, in a small project I would set a global config to use the default remote and a branch with the same name as my local one. This way I could just do git push and it will figure out the destination automatically. But in the case of my current project, it has multiple remotes and I need to be sure where my changes go every single time I push something, so just git push would be too ambiguous. The kind of middle ground I prefer is git push, then explicitly the name of the remote, and then instead of typing the branch name, I just use head, which tells Git to take the name of my current local branch. And in general, in most places in Git, you can reference your current branch using the head shortcut. The last thing is not really a tip, but rather an advice. I'm a big advocate for learning and understanding your essential tools. Git has been around for almost 20 years and doesn't seem to go anywhere anytime soon. And even if something better comes up, I'm sure it will be based on the concepts that Git introduced and refined over the years. And sure, there are other source control tools, but let's be real, Git is the dominant one, and I personally think is for a good reason. So it's a really good idea to invest some time to understand how Git works under the hood, just on the level of concepts and general mechanics. Of course, you don't need to understand everything on the implementation level, you are not a Git developer after all. And this is a 100% practical advice. You'll learn Git internals not to acquire some theoretical knowledge, but it will save you so much time and frustration over the years when no matter how bad some merge config is or you need to assemble a project into a specific state from 5 different branches, you will be able to analyze things down to basics and come up with a custom solution instead of just following some memorized runbook. Now, how would one achieve such an enlightenment? The official Git book, I think, is still the best resource out there. It's well written, easy to follow, and completely free. There is a Git internals chapter specifically, which I think is really good, but the book in general has a ton of other useful stuff. And of course, no need to read it as a normal book from start to finish, just choose chapters that look interesting to you. I hope this was in any way useful to anyone. Let me know in the comments and consider subscribing to the channel to see more dev stuff from me. Thank you for watching. Cheers.